Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little chat about a topic that is important to me, and it may well be to you too, and I think encapsulates a few things that sort of need to be said. This was brought on by the video I made recently about the greatest recording ever of Haydn's Seven Last Words of the Savior on the Cross by Jordi Savall, in that case on Alia Vox, which is an amazing recording. There's also a wonderful period instrument version on Harmonia Mundi by, Ensemble Resonance under, Minasi is the conductor, also fabulous, by the way. There are quite a few of them. And there's also, some of you mentioned, the oratorio version. Here it is, the beautiful hardback text study score from Henley. I wanted to mention this because it's available and it's not expensive, or at least it wasn't when I got it. What it is now, I have no idea. And it's absolutely beautiful. The oratorio version, the vocal version, is gorgeous, wonderful. And the best recording, some of you wanted to know which one it is. It's Harnoncourt's, by the way, on Teldec. That's the one you need to get if you want to hear the thing. And oh gosh, it's lovely. Anyway, so there's that. Actually, I got this out for a different reason, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I did that wholly positive and enthusiastic video because I love the work. I just think it's fabulous. And somebody wrote a comment, and the comment was something like, "It's our Savior, Jew." I mean, it was a very short comment. That was it. I thought at first maybe it was an issue with the fact that I had called the work The Seven Last Words of Christ on the Cross, because actually that's what it's called in the Amazon listing for the Harnoncourt recording. I was looking to see if it was still available. It's Christ on the Cross, the Savior on the Cross, whoever's on the cross. Somebody was on the cross. That's the point. And then I realized that maybe this person was insinuating that it was a proprietary work somehow, and that as a Jew I had no business talking about it, or that perhaps Jesus was not my Savior because he was the Christian Savior. Personally, I don't feel I need a Savior, but that's another issue. This is the point I want to make. For all of you atheists and agnostics and whatnot out there, I want to talk about the atheist or agnostic experience of sacred music, because I love sacred music. When I was growing up, I was in my high school glee club, our choir, and most of what we did was Christian sacred music. I mean, that's what choral music is in Western civilization, for the most part. I dare say I know more Latin liturgical music than most Catholics I've met. And I loved it, and it was wonderful. And every year we did our Christmas concert at Trinity Church on the Green in New Haven, and various other things like that of a religious nature. And it was beautiful, and it was wonderful to participate in the communal act of singing. And whether I actually believed the words or not really didn't make any difference, because I believed the music. And that's the point I want to make. If you think that because you are not a believer, that works like the B minor Mass or the Bach Passions or Handel's Messiah or any of these things, the requiems of everybody, are not applicable to you, I'm telling you, you're wrong. Because the only thing that matters is the music. And I'm saying to the religious people out there who seem to think that they have a proprietary right or claim or insight into sacred music because they happen to believe the words, you're wrong. That's totally not true. Because what matters is the music. First and foremost, yes, of course, the words have meaning, but they have meaning to the extent that they justify the musical setting. And that's always been true. I mean, we have to think about our history of sacred music generally for centuries. For example, in the West, I'm talking about, the Catholic Church was, was of two minds about music. To be used for worship and whether music was appropriate in the church. And of course, there were Protestant sects that banned it entirely. Why? Because they knew that music is a sensual object. Beautiful music is such as to turn the mind away from the devotional text and allow you to just wallow in the beauty of the music. And for that reason, they set certain restrictions. Historically, during the Renaissance, music had to be a cappella. Women couldn't participate because they were unclean and sexy, and that was bad. All of these strictures. But at the end of the day, they had to allow music in the church, because if they didn't, nobody would show up. People went to hear the music. They wanted the words of the liturgy to be cloaked in the most beautiful possible sounds. And so ultimately music won. Music won that battle. It triumphed over doctrinaire religion. Now, can music be spiritual? Of course it can. I made a whole video about how music can be spiritual. And everybody participates in that spirituality, whether you believe in anything spiritual or not. I mean, if music expresses the sound of a bird, you hear a bird, whether you believe in birds or not. What your personal beliefs are irrelevant to what the music expresses and your ability to respond to it. And if you do respond to it, then you do, and it's wonderful, and everybody responds to it equally. I mean, that's the point, or has the potential to respond to it equally. But I want to get back to Haydn a little bit, because it's just a very interesting fact. When he wrote the 7 Last Words, he wrote a preface, and that preface, I think, is an extremely important document to explain to us the relationship between sacred music and sacred text, because that's what we're talking about here. The interesting thing about the 7 Last Words, of course, is that it's sacred music to no text. I mean, originally, the oratorio version, yes, they wrote a text, but the original version was purely orchestral, which in itself is fascinating, because it is, in a way, the first avowedly spiritual piece of purely orchestral music. And that's a remarkable thing when you think about it. Not for Haydn, who invented everything, but that really is an amazing thing. Haydn actually said, when they asked him what his music was about, as a biographer, he said he was often thinking of moral qualities when he wrote his music, and spiritual qualities. And that's not something that usually comes to mind when talking about music of the classical period, not till you get to like the late quartets of Beethoven and the Missa Solemnis, or maybe Mozart's Magic Flute, where the spirituality is of a very different nature. But then again, music isn't capable of expressing differentiated spirituality. You can't say this music is Catholic, that music is Protestant, that music is Jewish, that music is Buddhist. Spiritual is spiritual. It's the same. It's the same no matter what the religion is, because the musical means are the same. The method is the same. The way that music becomes a spiritual experience is the same. It's part of the nature of what music is, not part of the nature of what doctrinaire religion is. That's a fact. It's an absolute fact. But anyway, let's talk about Haydn's preface to the 7 Last Words. It's very, very interesting. He wrote this for Breitkopf and Härtel, the publisher, who asked him to give some commentary about how the work came to be in 1801. And so Haydn wrote, "Some 15 years ago, I was requested by a canon of Cadiz to compose instrumental music on the 7 Last Words of our Savior on the cross. It was customary at the Cathedral of Cadiz." It wasn't the cathedral, it was the Church of Santa Cueva in Cadiz, by the way. It was a grotto, a fascinating place. Anyway, Santa Cueva, to produce an oratorio every year during Lent, the effect of the performance being not a little enhanced by the following circumstances. The walls, windows, and pillars of the church were hung with black cloth, and only one large lamp hanging from the center of the roof broke the solemn darkness. At midday, the doors were closed, and the ceremony began. After a short service, the bishop ascended the pulpit, pronounced the first of the 7 words or sentences, and delivered a discourse thereon. This ended, he left the pulpit and fell to his knees before the altar. The interval was filled by music. The bishop then, in like manner, pronounced the 2nd word and the 3rd, and so on, the orchestra following on the conclusion of each discourse. My composition was subject to these conditions, and it was no easy task to compose 7 adagios lasting 10 minutes each, and to succeed one another without fatiguing the listeners. Indeed, I found it quite impossible to confine myself to the appointed limits. Well, what does that tell us? First of all, none of these pieces is actually 10 minutes longer. One of them may be close, but most of them are a little bit shorter. But the point I want to make is that, first of all, Haydn's concerned with fatiguing the listener. In other words, he wants you to be awake and alert for both the spiritual import of the music and presumably the far less interesting discourse pronounced by the priest who was officiating at the ceremony. But beyond that, Haydn said he found it quite impossible to confine himself to the appointed limits. In other words, it was the music that dictated the final result. Musical needs. What did Haydn actually produce? Yes, 7 slow movements. They're not all adagios. Some are slower, some are quicker, some are louder, some are softer. They're in different keys. He built as much variety as he could into the work, but also he began with a long and also slow and lengthy and quite impressive and powerful introduction, which is not one of the 7 words. He framed the entire event and ended with, of course, that fabulous orchestral earthquake, 2 minutes of total mayhem, classical style, in which he invented the fortissimo, the first ever triple forte, is at the very end. Here it is. Let me show it to you. It's quite marvelous because, here it is, a sacred work, naturally, which is supposed to be, thinking about, higher things. And here, at the very end of the earthquake, there it is. You see it, folks? Let me see if I can see it there. Here it is. Yep. There it is. Triple forte. The loudest thing ever done in music up to that point. So when music and religion intersect, it is always the music which is going to take precedence if the result is great music that we listen to today. Now, there is no doubt that you could write lousy music, which is strictly doctrinaire and does whatever the church wanted to do. This is why Mozart detested writing for the Archbishop of Salzburg, who had a very, very limited view of the role of music in the context of the service. That was not Mozart's view of music. And there have been plenty of composers, let's not forget, who were not in themselves religious and who wrote sacred music, or who wrote sacred music for religions that had nothing to do with their own religion. I mean, Bernstein wrote a mass, which some people would say is a theater piece. It's not really a mass. But he also wrote a Missa Brevis, a lovely work that very few people know about. 2 of them. And nobody was more Jewish than Leonard Bernstein. Janicek's Glagolitic Mass was the work of an errant atheist. Verdi's Requiem was written by a composer who was anything but religious. He was agnostic at best. We see this over and over again. Berlioz's religious works, his Requiem, his Te Deum. Berlioz was a complete atheist. There's that wonderful, wonderful story of Berlioz and Mendelssohn, who was a devout Lutheran, on the Spanish Steps in Rome, where Mendelssohn takes a header and falls down the Spanish Steps as they're having an argument about, the validity of religion. And they were having a big fight, and Mendelssohn tripped and fell, and Berlioz got down there and dusted him off and said to Mendelssohn, "Observe the workings of providence. I blaspheme and you fall." So, the idea that people who are believers have some sort of proprietary access to sacred music, to the meaning of sacred music, to the affect, to the emotional impact of sacred music, is total, complete nonsense. And I say that with, total conviction. And I understand it may well be that believers who listen to music expressive of their own faith have an incredibly deep and moving experience of the music as a result. I mean, I don't deny that at all. I deny nobody their experience of music. I deny anyone's right to claim that their experience of music is innate for whatever reason, because of their class, their race, their ethnicity, their nationality, their religion, their sexual preference, any of those things, and to deny someone else their experience. I can tell you straight away that no religious person's view or experience of sacred music is more spiritually intense than mine, or yours, or anybody else's. It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs, or if it belongs to anyone, the music belongs to us all. It's our patrimony. So if you are a non-believer and you're wondering what all the hoo-ha is about, yes, you should listen to sacred music. You should listen to the intensity of faith that the music can convey, to the spirituality that the music can convey, because it's music, not because it's about religion. Not at all. And I just wanted to make that point. And I don't have a whole discussion about, well, yes, the music exists because of the text and the sacred text and this and that and whatnot. I'm not getting into that. What the music experiences is what the words say. What the music describes, what the music depicts, is what the words say to the extent that music can. And music has its own limitations, like any other language or art form. And there's a limit to what it can do. It can do a lot, but what it can't do is express the specifics of a religion. Only that general concept of faith, spirituality, and after that, the meaning of the words. And if the music is great, it speaks to all of us. And it speaks to all of us equally, without exception. And I'm sticking to that interpretation of it. So there we go. I mean, this whole thing was motivated by rather nasty anti-Semitic comment, of which I get them regularly. Don't feel sorry for me. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. I'm not hurt by it. I am. Well, it's distressing that people are out there who think that stuff, who do that sort of thing. I mean, and who have the temerity to actually set it down and write about it and be proud of it. It's a shame. But most of all, it's a complete and utterly mistaken view of what music is and what music can do. It has, and I think it's important that we all think about that concept. So that's it. I'm done blabbing. Thank you so much for listening. Keep on listening to whatever you want, and whatever you experience is true for you. And that's what matters. So take care.